Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another reloading chat. And so let's talk a little bit about the fact that the Army has already ended the intern combat service rifle program, which I did a video on a couple weeks ago when they started it. And I'm going to link a popular military article down below. I don't really want to get into their whole discussion of polymer case ammo or any of that. I don't think that's really the topic of this. But they're the first major publication to release information. I think they're about a day after the Army releases info that they're ending the program. What it ultimately came down to was that the logistics weren't there, the need wasn't there, and they just weren't getting support from the troops in the field over this. And I think the biggest part for the troops in the field were, do we really need this heavy of a projectile to carry around in combat loadouts? And that's a valid point. And I think that's a very valid point. As much as we may complain about the 5.56, wondering why this has been given to our boys in the field, why the troops have it, it's a rather anemic cartridge as far as rifle rounds go. But it's not terrible. And I'm going to get into that in a minute of maybe other possible solutions if they're going to stick with the 5.56 platform longer. Because that's ultimately the question we get into. This is the question I always ask. I'm a prepper. All right, I prep. I'm invested in the 5.56 cartridge. I have a fair amount of it, and I obviously have more than one weapon chambered in it, and I hand load a lot of it. So I'm invested in the caliber, but I always contemplate, is there a better alternative for my primary stockpile? Should I consider 6.8 SPC, 6.5 Grendel, 300 Blackout, some of the other Wildcats out there? Because I'm a hand loader, I'm not as worried about pre-made ammo costs because I'm going to hand load everything anyways. I don't care. I always wonder about it, and I weigh it out, and what it ultimately comes down to is that, can I do something cheaper and more effective all the way across the board than the 5.56? And it gets really hard when you do the math of, can I actually improve on it? People say, well, yeah, close range stopping gun, sure, okay, maybe. But when we start talking about cost per round and effective range, doping the wind and everything else, there's a lot to be said for this cartridge for the hand loader. Because we're not restricted to the things the military is. And the military's learned this also. And it ultimately comes down to, even with any of those cartridges, to pack 200 rounds around is still going to add in the weight. It's still going to add up. 200 rounds of 5.56 isn't that bad. I've got loadouts right now loaded with that by the bed because we were in the hurricane. Right, we were in the hurricane down here in Texas. There were talk of looters, everything else. And yeah, there was a looting problem, and several looters were killed. A lot were arrested. Not that far from me. So we have those loadouts ready, and they're manageable. They're manageable. But you guys remember when I bought my AR-10? I bought it as a vehicle weapon, as a trunk weapon, right? Because that's a lot of firepower for a vehicle. It's a lot of firepower for a vehicle. Have a carbine-style rifle, magazine-fed, chambered in .308. I mean, let's be honest, that's going to outgun just about anybody. Push come to shove, if I have to go toe-to-toe against any sort of armed conflict in my vehicle, if things pop off, if there's a problem, the odds that I'm not going to outgun anyone who's really causing a problem is going to be pretty slim. It's a force multiplier. You've got a lot of firepower. But you know what? That rifle's heavier. The rifle's heavier. The ammo's heavier. I've picked up 200 rounds of magazines. And, that was a factor for the boys in the field out there. They're saying, hey, we don't know about humping this extra ammo around. The weight of these loadouts, because they're still talking about 210-pound loadouts. And that's not insignificant when you start factoring in the weight. Because you need to remember is that weight adds up. A few extra pounds of ammo doesn't seem like much. People might, well, what's 5 pounds at the end of the day? Well, when these guys are humping it for 12 hours straight out in the field in a loadout, that extra 5 pounds adds up. That extra 5 pounds adds up. Especially when you factor in how much other stuff they're carrying. This stuff adds up. Then the weight of the rifle. That rifle is going to be at least 2 pounds heavier. Any 7.62 comparable rifle is going to be 2 to 3 pounds heavier. Alright, that's just the way it's going to be. And then, if you're carrying an extra 5 pounds of ammo, the fatigue adds up. And they've got to question, what does it bring to the table? And that was the thing. They didn't have support in the field, and their whole concern was armor penetration. And they know that ballistically, and even the military's admitted, the modern tungsten rounds that they have developed for the 308 will fit the 5.56. Not those bullets, but that same design, that the technology is usable in the 5.56, and it works just as effectively. Because it's all about sectional density, and since you've got a smaller diameter cartridge, or bullet, I mean, the projectile's smaller diameter. It has to displace less armor to get through it. So when you give it that sort of sectional density that tungsten gives it, and a nice hard projectile, got a lot of penetration ability. So the technology's there. And that's the thing that it ultimately comes down to. Is the military going to change from the 5.56? Maybe. But what they probably need to consider here is, if we're going to stick with it, how can we improve upon this? And I think the solution has, number one, already been found by the Spec Ops guys. They already know the solution. They've been utilizing it, haven't they, with the SPR, their designated marksman rounds. People will say, well, it just doesn't have enough power. Yeah, when you're shooting green tip out of a 14.5-inch M4 barrel, there have been a lot of situations of a guy having to be shot 2 or 3 times and getting back up. There have been plenty of these, and a lot of troops complain about it. A lot of the troops complain about it. A lot of them are happy with it. I guess it all depends on their individual experience. But, I live in Texas. People have been hunting here with these small calibers forever. I first started deer hunting as a child with a 22-250 with a 55-grain bullet. I've never seen a deer take one of those in a proper place and run. Like, people say, well, the deer run all the time. I've never seen it. I know lots of people who have. I've personally never seen a deer hit through the vitals with a 22-250 with a 55-grain bullet and get back up. Never seen it happen. I've never seen them run 100 yards. I've seen them run 10, 20 yards. And that's from my childhood. My grandpa and I both used that same caliber to hunt together with. We had different rifles. We used the same caliber. And we hand-loaded them. People hunt with ARs here all the time. They take white-tailed deer, which are a little tougher than humans. Still thicker skin game. They're tougher than people. Take them year after year consistently. I see wild hogs, which are a lot tougher than a human, get killed with these all the time. I've probably killed, in my lifetime, probably 20 hogs, probably 20 with a 223 from an AR. Not been a problem. So the question we get into, what are we all doing different than what the military's been doing? Bullet selection and barrel length. That makes a big difference. That makes a big difference. Part of it, you've got to consider the military is always going to have a shorter barrel. They're not going to be running 24-inch barrels. If you're stuck with a shorter barrel, what do we know? I've covered the physics of this before. Generally, you get a more efficient burn with a heavier bullet for every inch of barrel that you have. And I've covered that in the past. Is that simply put, you have more burn time. You have more lag time down the barrel because it's heavier. It's going to go a little slower with comparable powders. And we do use comparable powders per caliber. Most hand loaders don't use a dramatically different powder for a 75 grain versus a 55 grain. Okay, we don't. They're usually real close together. But you have a little less powder and a little more time for it to burn. You get away with a shorter barrel more. You got to keep that in mind. You're dealing with a caliber, very small caliber. You don't have a lot of barrel volume per inch. That shorter barrel really can hurt your velocity. They don't really use a heavy enough bullet for 20-inch and under barrels. They really don't, not ideally. Also, the 14.5-inch barrel is just simply not enough. And I understand they do it because it's great for clearing rooms. A 14.5-inch barrel for clearing rooms, fantastic, right? More maneuverable. Especially for guys who maybe don't have quite as much training as some of the spec op guys. It could be an advantage. But you are limiting terminal ballistics. And when it's limiting terminal ballistics to the point where they're talking about building entire new weapon systems, it's time to reconsider the philosophy here. You really want more power. You want more stopping power. You want to stick with the 5.56. They need longer barrels, and you need to go over to the designated marksman rounds. You need a bullet that consistently expands. And all of those open tip match rounds, I don't care whether it's the 69, the 77, Whether we're talking about Hornaday, Sierra, several of the others out there, Lapua, any of those, Berger, all those rounds will consistently expand at the effective ranges the military is using the M4 for. All right, they will expand. They generally will still expand below 2,000 feet per second. Okay, so as long as your bullet is staying pretty much transonic, even all the way down to transonic, you've got a decent chance of expansion. But you're staying over 1,600, you definitely have it. So I mean, we're talking about up to 500 yards, you're going to get expansion. You're going to get expansion and fragmentation. You need that with this smaller bullet. You simply need it. You don't get it, you're going to have a lot of zip throughs. You're going to have ice picking happen. You need speed and you need a better bullet. All right, these bullets, these heavier bullets, have better sectional density. They make better use of the shorter barrel. They're more aerodynamic. And these bullet designs, they fragment easier than the green tip. We're talking about changing whole weapon systems. You're talking about going to really expensive ammo at this point. A cheaper solution, if you're going to stick with the 5.56, equip more of these combat units with the designated marksman rounds. All right, switch them over like the SPR. The Spec Ops guys don't complain about these same problems the guys with the M4s do they? They're like, well, we get one-shot kills out at 600 yards all day long with the SPR. It's still a 5.56, still an AR pattern rifle. But they've got an 18-inch barrel, that extra 3.5 inches of barrel. All right, that's worth a couple hundred feet per second. It's going to add up to 200 yards to your effective range. In some cases, 100 to 200 yards to your effective range. You're going to get a lot better terminal ballistics, and then they're dealing with a better bullet. A bullet that is going to consistently do the job better. Not just at long range, but even in room clearing range. It's going to create a much larger, more dramatic wound cavity. All right, every time. Because it doesn't rely on yawing. Its sheer velocity causes it to fragment, and at close range it fragments even more violently. So it's actually very effective in close, even though those are long-range target rounds. That would solve their problems. That might be, in the meantime, the better solution. And the 5.56 isn't bad, and yes, it's underpowered, but you're still dealing with man-sized game. You're not dealing with 400-pound animals here, guys. You're not dealing with 400 or 500-pound thick-skinned animals. So in that situation, the problem with it is, simply put, just not quite enough barrel length and using the wrong bullet. Again, and that might be where the money would be better spent, and probably less money spent by the military to retool a lot of that. You know, you want to keep the M4 for certain purposes, that's fine. Training purposes, guard duty, everything else. But the guys actually in combat zones, it might be better to go ahead and switch them to something similar to the SPR. It doesn't need to be quite that advanced. They may not need all those optics and everything. But the 10-inch barrel and the designated marksman rounds, absolutely. I think that might be the better short-term solution until they figure out what they're going to do in the long term. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.